Good afternoon. Thank you so much. All right, so we have what I think is a very highly relevant talk and discussion, primarily, about some of the emerging issues related to virtual care providers and robots and robotics in healthcare. And what we're going to do is we're going to start off by just kind of giving you a quick overview of some of these technologies, and then we're going to have a Q&A session. All right, so you probably have heard, if you've not heard of it, if you just Google it, you'll find it, but the ELIZA program, which was developed by a MIT computer scientist, Joseph Weizenbaum, back in the 60s. And basically, it was the first simulation of a therapist, or at least one of the programs that ran on the ELIZA program, called the Doctor. And it was kind of a simulation of a Rogerian therapist. But since then, that concept of a virtual chatbot, a conversational agent, something that you can actually communicate with by typing in, has now been commercialized and is now available to the public. And on this slide here, I'm showing you some examples of that. These are now out there, and they provide some sort of basic kind of coaching, therapeutic conversations. Some of them are based on cognitive behavioral therapy. This technology is becoming more available to other developers. For example, Amazon Lex is a program that Amazon has put out to kind of create conversational agents. And I just learned the other day about IBM is now providing a service like that to enable other developers to develop these kind of conversational agents. And there's a bunch more other developers of this technology. But this is, it's here. These virtual kind of care providers are here. But this technology is fairly basic. It's kind of like a typing interface. But I'm going to show you another example.
Bill Ford. He lives online as a virtual human healthcare guide. Bill's available 24/7 to provide advice and support. He can direct you to relevant online content and help connect you with live care providers whenever you need them.
The name's William Ford, but you can call me Bill. Welcome to SimCoach.
Bill Ford is a sim coach from the University of Southern California Institute for Creative Technologies. Bill was created to help service members and their families dealing with post-traumatic stress. He helps break down barriers to care by offering access to accurate, anonymous information without ever leaving your home. He also represents the use of ICT's SimCoach platform, part of an ongoing research and development project devoted to the creation of online, conversational virtual humans.
Okay, so as you can see with that technology, you can actually change the way that the avatar appears, which can have some clear advantages in therapeutic settings. So this technology has evolved now to where it can be combined with other technologies to do really advanced things, such as assessment of nonverbal behaviors. I'm going to show you another example from the Institute of Creative Technologies that has done that, and I think it's just a really great example of where the technology can go in the future. And it might spook you out a little bit.
Hi, I'm Ellie. Thanks for coming in today. I was created to talk to people in a safe and secure environment. I'm not a therapist, but I'm here to learn about people and would love to learn about you. I'll ask a few questions to get us started. And please feel free to tell me anything. Your answers are totally confidential. Are you okay with this?
Yes.
So, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well.
So you can see the system
That's
is
good.
monitoring his facial expressions and
Where are
his
you from
voice,
originally?
his paucity of voice, his rhythm of voice, and also
I'm from
the
Los
context of
Angeles.
what he's saying.
Oh, I'm from LA myself. When was the last time you felt really happy?
When was the last time? I don't know. Yeah, I'm not someone who's really like, I don't have any real highs. I feel like I'm a level person. It's just happy. I guess to answer your question, probably a couple months ago.
I noticed you were hesitant on that one. Would you say you are generally a happy person?
I'm generally happy. It's just lately there are There are things just keeping me down.
Can you tell me more about that?
Okay, so as this example shows, again, you've got a simulation of in this case, the therapist. The therapist is simulated, and you've got a real live kind of client, right? And they're communicating with their therapist in a complete virtual way. This technology is not perfect. It has a lot of issues that can create some barriers in actually implementing it, but it is evolving rapidly. And in a previous paper, I talked about this concept of a super clinician, that one day we'd actually be able to create a clinician like this that has access to all of the data available about you, can do everything that I'm showing here and a bunch of other things that would really give it a sort of advanced capability in actually doing therapy. And I should mention that I'm a clinical psychologist by training, but I'm also a technologist, and I work in the field of technology, and I've really kind of melded the two together. And my interest over the last, I'd say, 5-6 years has really been on the practical application of these technologies, and particularly artificial intelligence, and the ethical implications of that. So I'm looking forward to talking more about the ethical implications of these technologies here in a few moments. So I'm going to turn over to Dr. Rick.
Great, thanks. So I'm a roboticist, and I specifically work in healthcare robotics. And what I'm going to do at this point is just show you a few examples of the use of robotics across the lifespan to help a number of people across a range of issues. So the first is autism. So some of you who work with children with autism might be aware of the use of robots in therapeutic settings. But there's been some new advances in this research space I'd like to share with you. So a lot of people have been looking at longitudinal deployments of robots in people's homes. So not just one time or once a week, but actually embedding the robot in someone's home for over 5 or 6 weeks. So two of my colleagues, Kirsten Dottenhahn and Ben Robbins, built one of the first robots for autism called Casper. And they recently placed it into somebody's home as the child who had autism. And there was a documentary team from the BBC that followed this family. And at the beginning of the documentary, which you can watch online, you'll see a lot of the challenges that the child was facing. But I'm just going to show you a couple clips from that.
Back in West London, it's been 24 hours since communication robot Casper arrived at the Doherty house.
He's still asleep. Do you want to wake him up? Yeah? Okay.
After a difficult start, Mum Michelle has devised a cunning plan to get her autistic son Ethan to give Casper a chance.
We think the best thing is to humanise the robot. So we decided to give Casper a bedroom. So we've used our study. He's got his name on the door. We've given him kind of a bed. And hopefully that'll keep him more engaged.
In fact, Casper's programmers recommend that users are reminded Casper is a robot and encouraged to transfer whatever they learn from it back to humans.
Would you like a cup of tea?
I don't know. Do you want to have a look at what we're doing with Casper today? Can you see? You tell me what you can see.
Like many children on the autistic spectrum, Ethan responds well to a strict routine.
We need to look after Casper because he's sick and he's hungry, okay?
And Michelle's making Casper part of theirs.
Oh, what did he do?
He did.
Is he sick?
Over the last year, she's developed a system using pictures and timelines to map out every element of Ethan's day.
Would you like a medicine?
Yeah.
Michelle's planned the next game to help Ethan master the thing he struggles with most, the art of conversation.
Should we ask Casper if he likes cookies?
Loves cookies.
So we say, Casper, do you like cookies?
Casper, do you like cookies? Oh, that's yummy.
Ooh,
I like it.
he likes
He does. Should we try another food?
Ask Casper if he likes it.
Yucky.
No, we say, Casper, do you like your food?
Unlike humans, Casper is patient. It's designed to give children like Ethan the time to think about what they'd like to say.
Casper, do you like the food?
I don't know.
Through spurs Michelle on to tackle another of Ethan's social sticking points.
Yummy, 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 yummy.
Family meal times.
Leave it there and go and sit at your chair, ready for lunch, and then we can play. Ethan loves his food, but he likes to zone out when he's eating, and the iPad is a good out for us.
You're happy and you know it.
You'd like to do a song, okay?
I am I am.
Whose turn is it next? Thank you.
The interaction has changed over the last few weeks. Ethan is controlling Casper, and that gives him a totally new way of interacting with the family.
So he's learning the rules through programming the robot, and that's helping him transfer those to interaction with people.
Arms up high. Right, you ready to go?
Come on! Thank you, Dolly. Now let's walk.
In Ruislip, West London, Ethan has a play date.
Dolly, listen. Do you love going for a walk?
Ethan spent the last 5 weeks practicing how to socialize with Casper the robot,
Let's go.
and is starting to put his new skills to use.
Come on, let's run. Let's run Can't get me, Ethan.
So another group that potentially can benefit from technological interventions is teens. So Elin Borjang, Emma Rose, and Maya Chakmak at UW are doing really excellent community-based research to build robots that teens can use to help to manage stress at school. So here's a clip from the Today Show that explains this project.
Time for kids. You have to fit in, get good grades, handle family pressure. It's a familiar struggle, but with new research underway, some schools are now taking a proactive, creative approach for the first time, launching new programs designed to manage teen stress and avert tragedy.
Which is why researchers are now developing unconventional tools like this.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Emar.
A lot of what we're seeing our teens telling us, this is very refreshing, and the key is without judgment.
Emar is a social robot prototype designed to measure adolescent stress levels.
How stressed do you feel right now?
Teens, they were born into a digital world, so it's very appropriate to be using technology in order to help them.
So what I like about this project is how the teens are helping to design the robots. And this is something that we see in our research as well. Community buy-in and ownership is really key when you're trying to design a successful intervention. So it's gonna be very exciting to see where this project leads. And across the lifespan, there's a lot of people looking at supporting older adults. And so there's a number of new robots that provide companionship to multiple groups of people, including older adults with dementia. These are usually pet-like robots. You can actually go down to the exhibit hall and see Paro, which is the robot on the right. It's a seal-like robot. And what's really interesting about these platforms is that they serve as a proxy for interacting with people. So the robot itself isn't necessarily doing a lot, but the fact that it's there in the space can get people to come out and socialize with one another, which can be really supportive in a lot of these communities. And there's also been a number of recent studies showing that platforms like this help to reduce psychotropic drug use, helps to reduce anxiety and stress, and can also relate to other positive health outcomes. So these are some really positive things coming down the pike. And the last thing that I want to show you is my lab's exploring a series of projects to explore kind of how we can deploy robots long-term to provide adaptive, personalized support to people undergoing neurorehabilitation for traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, and stroke, as well as encouraging wellness as people age and supporting caregivers. So really core to our research philosophy is to design systems in close collaboration with community partners and to provide scaffolding. And the idea is that we want to provide the right support at the right time in the right way. We don't want to overdo it. We don't want to cause de-skilling. And the other thing is we want to augment and support existing caregivers and clinicians. The idea is not to automate anything or to take anyone's jobs away. Rather, it's to fill care gaps and reach people in need. So I'm just going to show you this quick demo, which is an early prototype of one of these systems in a smart home that's learning people's patterns and preferences over time and trying to provide support that's catered to the individual.
Earlier you were a bit tired. How about we take a break?
Great.
Let's go to your favorite hosting location. Please lie down on the couch for a bit before we get started. Are you ready to start?
Yes.
First, let's stretch our necks. stretch our arms. Can you raise it higher?
Okay, so you kind of got an idea of the different types of technologies that are out there, both in the virtual character space as well as in the robotic space. And what we want to do now is transition to a discussion on ethics. So David, we've spoken before about some of these care gaps and how technology can reach people without access to care. And so I'm wondering, what do you see as some of the clinical benefits to these technologies?
Yeah, so when I think of care gaps, I think of at least three primary things. So you have really a lack of care providers available in communities, so there's just the access to them because they're just not there. Another is just the cost of care is prohibitive for many people. Plus, in secondary ways, like they have to take time off from work, they're concerned about, well, I can't do that to go see somebody, or other types of barriers, even just travel, going across town to see a therapist. Another issue is also the stigma associated with seeking care. People don't necessarily want to go seek mental or behavioral health care. I think these technologies, in particular like these virtual humans that act like coaches, they are available 24/7. They can be, I didn't show you this, but they're now being deployed onto smartphones or mobile devices. So think about it, you have a therapist literally in your pocket, right, available to you at any time to assist you with something, potentially. And also, the cost of these is not, I don't really know. I mean, there's a development cost, but these chatbots that I showed you, at least those images at the beginning, they're relatively inexpensive to create. I mean, you can actually, if you're into this, you could actually create your own and create them. So I think another advantage too is getting over the barrier of stigma, is that people might be more comfortable actually talking with these in their home rather than going somewhere and talking to a real human. And there's now some data in the literature suggesting that people may actually prefer talking to a virtual human than a real person. And some of the reasons are for that is that they may feel that they can talk about more personal things, they don't feel like they're being judged by the person, and then also in the privacy of your home if you're able to do it. Of course, the flip side of that is, and I'm not going to get too deep into it, but it's something I've written about, is that what are the implications of our field when it's a very human-centered field, and are we losing something when we're losing that actual human therapist-patient-client interaction? So, Laurel, you showed some nice examples of stakeholder-centered technology design. Why is it important in healthcare robotics, and how do you engage in it?
So one of the things that we know from the health behavior change literature is it's really important for people to feel ownership in an intervention, or they're going to abandon it. And I like to give the example of stroke rehab robots. So when they first came out, they were really, really difficult for both clinicians and people that are recovering from stroke to use. So all of these hospitals that bought these robots ended up with $1 million coat racks. And there's just this huge rate of abandonment. So instead, what works really well is to co-design with stakeholders from the beginning. So for example, we have a new project we're doing with caregiving and dementia. So what we're doing is we're actually working with caregivers, or working with social workers, we're working with others to try to collaboratively build this next generation of technology and support. And one of the things that we do is people don't need to be a technologist in order to design technology. We do cardboard and Post-it notes and all that kind of thing. Really these low-tech prototyping tools to get people to think about the context of the technology in their lives, as well as the context of health behavior. So, and our goal is really with this practice, we can reach a place of success. So I'm wondering, David, what are some of the things that you think about, ways that we can use this technology to augment existing clinical practice?
Yeah, I think there are a number of ways that, let's say, virtual humans could be applied to clinical practice, and that they are being applied to clinical practice. One is this idea of the coach. So they can be a great behavioral coach, again, that's available 24/7, and that could augment regular in-office care. So let's say you are someone's psychologist and they're coming to see you. In between sessions, that client could be interfacing with the virtual coach, and they could be given behavioral reminders, for example, to do certain things, even assessments. They could be checking in on your client's anxiety or mood on any given day at any time. So I think we're going to see in the research field, in our field, a lot more research on this in the future. In fact, there's been some really interesting stuff done with helping people with psychotic disorders, specifically schizophrenia, using virtual humans as sort of a grounding tool. So I think there's a lot of areas that I think are going to benefit from these virtual humans potentially. I think another example of its application is in discharge planning, for example, from, say, an inpatient unit. There's been some initial research done using virtual humans in hospital settings, and what they could do is they can provide, they can spend some time with the patient before they're discharged and help them through all their kind of plannings, like the medication regimen, other kinds of things that they need to be doing. And there's some initial data suggesting that patients actually prefer talking with these virtual humans because the virtual humans, they never feel pressured by the virtual human in regards to how much time. They can take as much time as they want talking to the virtual human, and the virtual human can be programmed to always be in a good mood, and they can be adjusted to the needs of the person who's interacting with them. So those are just a couple examples of how I think these systems are and shall be used probably in the future. So let's transition to discussing some of the challenges and risks of these technologies. So first, what are things that we should be thinking about in regards to privacy and security?
So right now, the law says that it's up to individuals to protect themselves against companies collecting, using, buying, and selling our personal data. And the problem with this approach is most people have absolutely no idea the depth and the level of intrusive data collection that's going on in our society. So we really live in a digital panopticon. It's not just our financial history, not just our social media posts, but also our faces and our facial expressions and our voices and our conversations and who we're talking to. Even data that we might consider to be HIPAA protected can easily be bought and sold and inferred. So from your search history, from various health groups that you participate in, from your sleep habits. And what's really scary about this level of unfettered data collection is that companies and governments use it to make decisions about us all the time. And a lot of it is including our mental and behavioral health and wellness. And unfortunately, none of it is evidence-based. So I don't know how many of you, there's a really great book I recommend called Weapons of Mass Destruction by Cathy O'Neil. And she gives this really nice example of a person who kept getting rejected, job after job, grocery store, pharmacy, fast food restaurants. It turned out that the employers were all administering personality questionnaires. And in those personality questionnaires, they asked people questions like, people do a lot of things that make you angry, and there's no use having close friends, they always let you down. So using this as an employment decision is a direct violation of the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act, but it's very difficult to prove discrimination just because you weren't invited to an interview. And what's worse is this was an explicit employment questionnaire. So I'm going to paint just a thought experiment here. Imagine a person's feeling depressed, and let's say they do some internet searches on depression. Now imagine also their smart speaker notices they're playing a lot of sad music. Maybe when they request things, they're using a very slow tone of voice. Maybe this person goes to the store and looks at St. John's wort. Maybe they buy some. And their face is being constantly recorded while they're using their computer, maybe while they go to the grocery store, probably by traffic cameras. And imagine there's some system out there that's analyzing all their facial expressions and finding out that they frown a lot. So a company can buy all of these data points and all of these different things and fuse them together and make some decision that there's an 85% likelihood that this person experiences depression. None of this, of course, ever validated by anyone. None of the data were checked for veracity. None of the decisions were validated by trained clinicians, right? So maybe the person was frowning because they just had Botox. Maybe they were doing internet searches for a friend. Maybe they were sleeping a lot because they had a sleeping disorder. Who knows, right? The problem is, what happens now is another company could then buy this software, and rather than reporting a history of or a likelihood of depression, they're stating the risk of this person. Well, there's a high risk that they're going to be absent from work a lot if you hire them, or there's a risk that they're not going to show up if you enroll them in classes, or there's a risk they won't pay their mortgage on time. So this is entirely a thought experiment, but I want to emphasize there's absolutely nothing to prevent this sort of abuse from happening. There are no laws, there's no regulation, there are no checks and balances on data collection, data fusion, and data usage. Instead, what we're doing is we're expected to trust corporations to have a high degree of ethics. It's really clear this isn't working. We really need legislation to prevent these abuses and this massive ability to discriminate against people, particularly people with mental health disorders. And we also really need to educate everyone about these dangers and demand that companies be held accountable. So on that note, David, you've worked a lot with technologies to prevent suicide, and you've also worked with vulnerable populations. I'm curious what some of the safety risks are inherent in those technologies.
Yeah, I can speak for myself. I'm probably speaking for most other psychologists that one of the things that can create the most anxiety is when you have a client who is espousing suicidal thoughts and active ideation, and more so when they espouse that they have a plan, right? It's very stressful, and you really have to have the skills and the competencies to manage that effectively. Now, think about when these types of systems, like these virtual humans, for example, are deployed, and people out there in the public are paying it for a service, and they're getting online, they're using it, and then they espouse that they're going to harm themselves or someone else to one of these systems. So think about the duty to warn requirements that we have ethically as professionals. How would these systems handle that? And one of the things that I've argued for is that we need to always be thinking about that, the developers of these, and build that in. So whether or not you're using detection of certain keywords, phrases, semantic analysis to kind of detect that risk and then alert a real human therapist that could do an intervention, intervene. Some of these existing types of technologies like this, even just on, say, Facebook or Google, these nothing to do with healthcare. If you type in certain words, you automatically get hit with links to, say, the crisis helpline, right? And so that's one way that they can sort of automate those kinds of things using the technology itself. But I'm personally concerned about the risks that this brings, the liability that this brings to companies that deploy these systems, or to us as a field. Could this potentially damage some trust and create some other issues for us? So it's something that I think we can address with the ethical, smart design of these systems and through technology. So you've written before about bias, ranging from the appearance of a system to how data is used to make decisions. What are some of these biases, and what can be done to prevent them?
So when the first face recognition systems came out, they didn't recognize non-Caucasian faces, and speech recognition systems did not recognize people who had non-American accents or who had speech impediments. And the first gesture recognition systems didn't recognize wheelchair users, didn't recognize people who had lost a limb, because the initial systems, you had to stand up like this with both of your limbs in order to calibrate the system. So what happens is that bias can happen at many stages. So the first question that one asks is, who is the team that was making this system? How are they comprised? What are their backgrounds? What are their perspectives? And while things are getting a lot better, overall, a lot of companies still have a really long way to go to recruit, retain, and support diverse teams. And the second question is, what data sets were being used? All machine learning requires data. Where did that data come from? Who is represented in it? Is the data set fair, or does it exacerbate existing biases? There's been a lot of work recently by a number of people looking at how people from certain communities with certain backgrounds can be incorrectly classified. Probably the most famous one that happened in the news just a couple weeks ago was Amazon has a new system called Rekognition, and it does real-time facial recognition, and it's actually being sold to police agencies as well as to local governments. And again, mind, there's no checks and balances on the accuracy of the system. So the ACLU did a really nice demonstration of the dangers of this technology. They ran the software on members of Congress, and it falsely labeled 28 Congress people as felons.
Falsely.
Falsely. Yeah, they probably didn't catch the real ones. Including all members of the Congressional Black Caucus. So that's really problematic and really bad, and really shows that there's just a really long way to go in these systems. And the other question that one needs to ask with regards to bias is, how is the system updated over time, and how robust is it to hacking? it's currently trivial for hackers to trick a lot of these systems into classifying all sorts of incorrect things simply by changing things in the environment or giving fake data to the system. A great example of this is if you see any of those autonomous cars, you can totally mess the vision systems up by putting stickers on a stop sign, and then it won't recognize the stop sign anymore. But humans still will, right? So you can only imagine the analogs of this for mental behavioral health. So bias is a huge problem. And I've worked with a number of government organizations and industry to help to address this topic. So there's a number of things that can be done. The first is to really make diverse teams a priority, not just recruitment, but also retention. Another thing is to make sure that data sets are inclusive. So reach out to communities and get their feedback and bring them part of their process the entire time. And the other thing is don't just test the system for failure and security and things like that, but try to test outside the box. Does the system reflect biases? Can it be changed to reflect biases? You know, do red teaming, do bias red teaming. Bring in an independent team of experts to evaluate the system. And the last thing is always one should ask the question, should we be building this system at all? Is this really the right direction that we want to go in? I mean, there's really no way that real-time omnipresent facial recognition is a good thing. So those are just a couple of examples of things that can be done for bias. Along these lines, I'm wondering, what are some of your thoughts on the cultural competency of these systems?
Right. So really one of our central tenets in our ethics code and guidelines as psychologists is cultural competency, right? If we're not culturally competent, a number of bad things can happen. We can not be effective at providing the care and the treatment that we're supposed to be. It can also just turn people off from even seeking care, right? And so I think it's the same thing with these systems. As these are developed, we need to be very mindful of making them culturally competent. I think an advantage of the technology is that I think we could actually do it really well if we're being mindful of the biasy stuff that you just talked about. Because you can actually change the way that these things appear, you can change the way that they speak, you can change the way that they the mannerisms, for example, that they may use, the nonverbal interactions that the virtual therapist may use. And as I showed you in that other example with Ellie, the virtual therapist talking to the real person, she kind of made saying that, a rapport building thing. I'm also from LA, right? So I think we can do things like that that can actually, I think, improve the way that these systems are designed to interact with very diverse populations of which they're supposed to serve.
Should I skip to the last question?
Yeah, let's go to the next one.
The last one.
Okay, let me ask it.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. We had a bunch more questions, but because we're going a bit late, so we're gonna kind of go to one of our most important questions. So let's see. Okay. How can non-technologists be empowered to build a brighter future and help steer their conversation?
So I think one thing that non-technologists can do, so all of you can do, is to always ask questions and demand accountability and transparency. If you're part of an organization that's thinking about purchasing software, ask the company, how diverse was the team that made that? What data did you use? How did you validate the veracity of this data? Did you have independent experts test the system, red team it to look for bias, to look for errors? How can the system be hacked? How could some of the things be changed? Ask them, is this evidence-based? Who were the experts that you consulted with to build the system or to validate it? And one of the other questions you can ask is, what type of technology ethics training do you give to your employees? Do you regularly employ social scientists, ethicists, policymakers, and academics in your process? And if they don't address your questions adequately, tell them that you have no interest in purchasing their software until they do. And imagine if every single one of you did that, companies would really be forced to be accountable.
Yeah, and I think just as a final kind of closing comment, the very fact that you are here listening to this is really great, because I think as psychologists and really all healthcare professionals need to be aware of these emerging technologies and our role that we have in assuring that they're developed and deployed and implemented and researched appropriately. I mean, we have to be involved in this. Otherwise, there's potential that some technologies out there can actually cause harm. And unfortunately, sometimes technology is developed so fast, it gets out there and it's deployed before people have a chance to really think about the ethical ramifications for it and even the legal ramifications. So thank you for attending.
Thank you.